Who doesn't like a great story or an epic journey? I sure do. One of my favorite stories is The Lord of the Rings, which is a journey of epic proportions. In the story, we follow our protagonist Frodo Baggins through various exciting episodes and many deeply meaningful moments. It is an adventure story, but also a love story. There are battles, but not on every page. There's plenty of dialogue, but also a generous amount of description. Parts of the story are lighthearted, while much of the story is heart-stopping. It is an amazingly well-told story from beginning to end. The narrative draws us in, causes us to care, and leaves us with hearts full of hope. I believe that worship leaders ought to think of worship as a journey. Let's talk about that a little bit more on today's Weekly Worship Thoughts. I believe that worship leaders ought to think of worship as a journey. In reality, we have the unparalleled privilege of musically retelling the greatest story ever told. Our protagonist, God, has led his people through various exciting episodes and many deeply meaningful moments. His is a story of adventure, but also of redemption and unending love. The story we get to retell includes hard-fought battles, but not on every page. The story of God is filled with dialogue, but it also provides a generous amount of description. Parts of God's story are lighthearted, while much of it is heart-stopping. God's story is one that has been amazingly well told from beginning to end. His story draws us in, causes us to care, and leaves us with hearts full of hope. Of course, there is at least one huge difference between The Lord of the Rings and the story of God. The story of God is actually true. When it comes to leading God's people in worship, we should craft our Sunday set lists with this reality in mind. We are telling an incredible story, and we should aim to tell it well. We need to remind our people of how exciting it is to follow Jesus, but also to lead them in deeply meaningful, reflective moments. It's okay to include an upbeat, rousing song in your set list. Maybe that song is not overly deep in theology, but no worries. We're leading them on an epic journey, and it's okay to just stop and celebrate along the way. But it's also okay to take a moment and go deeper. Perhaps that means leading a song that helps us to consider the depths of God's love for us, even the depths of our own love for Him, maybe both. This is an important part of the journey as well. Don't forget that you have people in your congregation who are currently fighting their way through a vicious battle. In fact, our enemy, Satan, desires to kill us, to steal from us, and to destroy us every moment of every day. There is a very real spiritual war happening during every single church service, whether we recognize it or not. I once heard someone say that when Satan fell from heaven, he landed on a soundboard. Well, that's kind of funny, and every sound man says amen. The reality is that while we worship, we are waging war. Let's remind our people through song that God is fighting for us. He is victorious. The joy of the Lord is our strength. We are more than conquerors through Christ. Yes, it is good to sing love songs to the Lord, but let us raise our battle cry as well. It is also completely appropriate to sing songs that allow us to dialogue with the Lord or to simply sing descriptive songs about who He is. I occasionally like to lead songs that are written even from God's perspective. Sometimes I encourage the congregation to simply listen and to receive as the worship team sings over them. At other moments, we seem to be singing more about God than to Him, and this is okay. We are together reminding our souls of the myriad reasons why God alone is worthy of our praise and adoration. So worship leaders, go ahead and mix it up a little. Provide lighthearted moments and illuminate heart-stopping truths as you lead us on this epic journey of worshiping the King of all kings. Be intentional about drawing us in, causing us to care, and leaving us with hearts full of hope. If you have ever learned to drive a standard transmission vehicle or perhaps rode along with someone who is not overly good at it, then you know the pain and the discomfort of poorly shifted gears. It's not great. Unfortunately, I think our worship sets can feel a bit like that sometimes as well. As we are leading the congregation on a musical journey, we want to think through the high and the low parts, and we want to smooth out our transitions along the way. So let's look at a typical Sunday morning set list and get an idea of what thinking of worship as a journey could look like. Now let's say that we have an opening song, 3 songs in the middle, and then a song at the end of the service after the sermon. For that first song, I would lean towards a high energy, popular song that everyone can sing along with to really set the stage. Or I would consider a more mellow but still popular song that everyone can sing along with. But it totally depends on what you're going for in that moment. The general idea here is that people are coming into the sanctuary and this is their first moment of contact with the service. Now, depending on your context, you may want to start with a song that really gets people going first thing in the morning, or you may be wanting people to have a chance to ease into the morning. Think of a trip to a swimming pool. There are those of us who love to just run at full speed and dive into the water and get it over with, and then there are those of us who like to dip our toes and then our feet and then our legs and so on. And I think either approach would be good for an opening song, but I would encourage you to mix it up a bit from week to week so that you don't fall into a rut. Either way, it is important to remember that we are just setting the stage here. We are only just beginning our journey. For many church contexts, our journey will be briefly delayed then by announcements of some sort following that opening song. No worries, just use that to your advantage. The announcements should give you plenty of time to tune, so you could use an opening song that is in a completely different key from the rest of the songs that morning. You could also end that first song with a big battle ending if it's an upbeat song, or perhaps a reflective prayer or a refrain if it's more of a mellow song. And then just invite people to take a seat as the person who is planning to give the announcements takes the stage. Now, there are plenty of ways to smooth out that transition, but I would encourage you to just be intentional about it. Plan ahead and then implement your plan. Following the announcements, the journey is back on. Now, these three songs will really make up the bulk of your set list. This is the meat of your journey, so think through where you want to take the congregation. Do you want to start low and then end high? Or do you want to start high and then end low? Or do you want to start somewhere in the middle, go high, and then end low? There are many ways to take the audience on an effective and edifying journey. Again, just be intentional about it. Consider the theme of the morning. What is the pastor preaching on? If the pastor is planning to preach on the suffering of Christ, I would consider ending low with a reflective refrain to really set that message up well. If the pastor is planning to preach on how we are more than conquerors through Christ and how we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us, then I would consider ending with a big rousing chorus of exuberant praise to really set that message up well. A couple of key things to consider here with several songs in a row: try to avoid songs or transitions that will require significant tuning between them. I've played with worship leaders who will lead the first song in the key of G, the second song in the key of B flat, and then the third song back in the key of G, and that's just not ideal. Most likely the guitarist will be ready for that first song, but then we'll have to put on a capo and retune for the second song, because putting a capo on a guitar is helpful, but a guitar always needs to be retuned when you put a capo on it. And then of course the capo will come back off for that third song, which is back in G, and guess what? The guitar will need to be retuned again, because the guitar always needs to be retuned when you take a capo off. And that's going to be a couple of rough transitions that could have been avoided with just a little bit of forethought. The easiest way to keep rolling from one song to the next is to just select three songs that are all in the same key for that middle part of the service. But if you can't do that, at least consider moving from one key to the key of the 4 or the 5 chord of the original key for your next song. For instance, if your first song is in the key of G, consider using a song in the key of C or D next. C would be the 4 chord in the key of G, and D would be the 5 chord in the key of G, so that makes for a very easy transition. Now, along with the theme and the key, you want to consider tempo for your song selection here in the bulk of the songs. There's hardly anything more grinding than when a slow, reflective song ends and then the drummer gives a 1, 2, 3, 4 count on the drumsticks for an upbeat power chord driven anthem. You really don't want to put your people through that jarring transition. Sometimes it makes sense to me to follow a slow, reflective song with an upbeat power chord driven anthem, but in order to do that well, I will adjust the arrangement of the upbeat song. Rather than starting with the 4 clicks of the drumsticks, I'll start it rather low and reflective. Maybe I'll just sing the chorus a few times, shifting gears slowly so everyone is prepared for the 4 clicks of the drumsticks. Or maybe I will sing the entire first verse and chorus with just the accompaniment of the acoustic guitar, bringing the rest of the band in after that first chorus. For the final song, Following the Message, I would really want to take my cue from the message itself. How did it end? Would it be most appropriate to celebrate with a rousing anthem of praise? Or would it be more appropriate to give people an opportunity for somber reflection? Do what the moment requires. Bring the full band and celebrate, or simply sing a chorus alongside of the piano. The idea here is simply that we want to take people on a journey, musically speaking. We want to avoid rough transitions, and we want to tell a coherent message that covers the depths of the valleys and the heights of the mountains and everything in between in the story of God leading His people. With a little bit of forethought and intentionality, we can take God's people on a journey that draws them in, causes them to care, and leaves them with hearts full of hope. What do you think about this idea of treating worship as a journey? In what ways do you currently treat worship as a journey? In what ways do you think you have room to grow in treating worship as a journey? What was one interesting truth or idea that stood out to you today, and how do you think that truth or idea will help you in the future? Can you think of any time that you have experienced a rough transition during congregational worship? Did that moment enhance or take away from the overall worship experience? And in what ways?